CEO's public praise for a girl's drawing shocked her laughing classmates. Sofia sat in the corner of the classroom, her back pressed lightly against the wooden chair, hands trembling as she held the pencil that had been her only friend for as long as she could remember. The scratch of graphite against the paper was the only sound she trusted, each line carrying her heart, her hopes, and her silent voice. Around her, the classroom buzzed with laughter, whispers, and careless chatter, but she kept her eyes fixed on her drawing. To anyone else, it was just a paper with lines, but to her, it was a dream, a safe little world where no one laughed. Her strokes shaped a small cottage, with a roof leaning under the weight of tall trees, the sunlight breaking through the clouds to fall upon its doorway. Every detail mattered to her, the crooked chimney, the flowers near the path, the little window glowing with imagined warmth. For her, art was not decoration, it was breathing. Yet even as she finished the last line, her chest tightened, for she knew what would follow. Slowly, carefully, she placed the pencil down, her small fingers leaving faint smudges of graphite on her palm. She lifted the drawing with both hands, her arms stiff as though the paper weighed 1,000 pounds. The journey from her desk to the teacher's table felt longer than a road across mountains. Whispers already rose behind her as she walked. The students leaned closer to one another, elbows nudging, lips curled in mischief. She pretended not to hear, but her ears burned red, her steps faltered, yet she pushed forward. When she placed the drawing gently on the desk, the giggles turned into audible snickers. "What's that supposed to be?" a boy muttered, not even bothering to lower his voice. The sound cut through her like a blade. A ripple of laughter spread like fire across the room. She froze, her back set, till facing them, and every giggle felt like an arrow piercing her skin. "Look at those crooked lines," another sneered, his words dripping with cruel amusement. Some students clapped mockingly, banging their fists on the desk in rhythm with their laughter. A girl with braids pointed and said loudly, "That doesn't even look real." The class erupted in louder laughter, the kind that swallows a person whole. Sofia's shoulders hunched, her head sinking lower, as if she could fold herself into invisibility. Her lips trembled, but she bit them shut, desperate not to cry. She walked back to her seat, every step heavier than the last. Her classmates' voices followed her, like shadows she could not escape. "It looks like a baby drew that," one boy announced proudly, earning more cruel giggles. "Even my little brother draws better," another added, slapping the table, as if the joke were too funny. Sofia gripped the edge of her desk when she sat down, her fingernails digging into the wood until they hurt. She lowered her head, her hair falling like a curtain to shield her face. But the curtain was thin. Behind it, tears pricked her eyes, though she refused to let them fall. The noise grew louder and louder, echoing inside her skull. She wanted to shout, to defend herself, to tell them that art was more than perfection, but her voice was buried under their cruelty. Her drawing sat on the teacher's desk, looking smaller and weaker now, stripped of the beauty she had seen in it only moments ago. She dared not look at it again. Her heart ached as though someone had stolen a secret from her and mocked it before the world. She whispered inside her head, "Why do I even try?" The thought stung worse than the laughter. Around her, pencils scratched again, papers rustled, the world moving on as if her pain meant nothing. The teacher, too distracted with other work, didn't scold the students. Now, at silence cut deeper than the insults. No one stood up for her, no one said it was enough. She was alone in a room full of voices. Each chuckle carved deeper scars in her chest. She wanted to reach forward, grab her drawing, and tear it to pieces before they could laugh anymore. But her hands stayed frozen in her lap. Her nails pressed against her skin so hard that faint half-moons appeared. She stared at the floor, tracing the lines of the tiles with her eyes, begging the moment to end. The sunlight that spilled through the window no longer felt warm. It only reminded her how visible she was. She wished for shadows to hide in. The sound of chairs squeaking, students shifting, and a few more whispered jokes filled the air like poison. Her ears burned with shame. She thought of her mother, who always smiled at her drawings, who told her she had a gift. Would her mother still think that if she heard this cruel laughter? She wanted to believe yes, but her heart wavered. The words of her classmates drowned out her mother's gentle encouragement. She curled her fingers tighter together. Her chest rose and fell unevenly, as if she were struggling to breathe. She wished she could shrink small enough to slip between the cracks of the floor. She wished she could be anywhere else but here. Her classmates moved on, but the laughter lingered in her ears, replaying over and over. Even when they stopped speaking, she could still hear it in her head. Each echo reminded her of her difference, of her isolation. The classroom around her blurred as tears filled her eyes. She blinked them away quickly, terrified someone would see. She had learned long ago that tears only gave them more reasons to mock. So she swallowed them, burying them deep, pretending she was fine. But inside, a storm brewed, one that she could not show. The world outside her window looked bright and free, yet she was trapped inside a cage of cruelty. She longed to be in her drawing, inside that cottage, safe from laughter. In that world, no one hacked her crooked lines. In that world, she could breathe. But here, in this classroom, her art was no longer her safe place. It had become her wound. And though she stayed silent, though she kept her head low, her heart screamed louder than any insult. No one heard it. No one cared. And in that moment, Sofia decided the only way to survive was to hide her art, to hide her heart, from the world that only wanted to break it. The classroom still carried the faint echo of laughter when the sound of hurried footsteps came from the hallway, followed by the creak of the door opening wider than usual, pulling every pair of eyes forward. The teacher straightened quickly, smoothing the papers on the desk with nervous hands, and the principal entered with a tall man in a dark tailored suit beside him. His presence was commanding, not loud or flashy, but the kind that made silence fall without effort. The students instantly shifted in their seats, their spines stiffening, their smirks disappearing, as though they had never existed. They recognized him from the news, from billboards, from the whispers of parents at home. Mr. Adrian Cole, the CEO who had built an empire from nothing, a millionaire whose name carried weight in every conversation about success. His shoes clicked softly against the floor as he walked, and even that sound seemed important. The principal introduced him with the kind of respect reserved for royalty, speaking about achievements, awards, and the journey of hard work that brought him here. The students listened, wide-eyed, some even leaning forward on their desks, as if they were in the presence of magic. For a group that only moments ago had been snickering at Sofia, their faces now shone with awe and greed for approval. Every boy wanted to impress him, imagining themselves as future tycoons. Every girl whispered silently about the power he carried in his confident stride. But at the back of the room sat Sofia, small and quiet, her head bent low, her fingers tangled together under the desk. While the others straightened their posture and forced smiles of politeness, she shrank further into her seat, terrified of being noticed. Her heart still carried the sting of humiliation, the laughter replaying in her chest like an unending echo, and the thought of any more eyes on her was unbearable. She wished she could vanish into the wall, to be invisible, forgotten, unseen. Mr. Cole's deep voice filled the room, steady and calm, speaking of dreams and hard work, telling the students that greatness was never born from privilege but from perseverance. His words painted pictures of nights spent working while the world slept, of sacrifices that carved paths to opportunities, of faith that kept him moving when everything seemed impossible. The students nodded eagerly, hanging on to every word as though they were secrets to unlock a future of riches. Yet Sofia barely heard them. She traced the faint scratches on her desk with her finger, pretending to listen, but her mind was trapped in the weight of shame that had settled inside her moments ago. Every laugh from earlier still clung to her like a second skin, and even in the presence of a man as important as Adrian Cole, she could not shake it off. She wondered if someone like him had ever been mocked, if his dreams had ever been ridiculed, or if the world had always admired him. She could not imagine someone like him sitting where she sat, small and unwanted, with people waiting to laugh at the things that mattered most to him. Around her, the students began whispering about how amazing it was that such a man was standing in their classroom, and some even adjusted their drawings or notes on the desk, hoping he might glance their way. Sofia did not dare move. She hoped he would keep speaking to the class as a whole, and never look down the rows closely enough to notice her. The excitement in the room grew as he shared stories of his life, moments of failure that turned into lessons, and times he almost gave up. Each sentence was a spark to the eager minds of her classmates, who now looked at him with something close to worship. But Sofia felt none of their excitement. She only felt smaller, her silence deeper, her fear sharper. She knew that if anyone looked too closely, they would see the tears she had been holding back, the storm still raging quietly in her eyes. So she sat perfectly still, her gaze fixed on the corner of her desk, as if the wood itself was her shield against the world. All around her, the air buzzed with admiration for the guest, but inside Sofia's chest was only a hollow ache. She did not know yet that his presence in this room would change everything, that the very man she wanted to avoid would be the one to see her in a way no one else ever had. The principal led Mr. Adrian Cole slowly between the rows of desks, his polished shoes making soft echoes against the tiled floor, and the students straightened further, hoping his eyes would linger on their work. His gaze swept over sketches and papers, polite but uninterested, until something near the front caught his attention. Resting quietly on the teacher's desk was a single sheet of paper, its edges smudged from the small hands that had carried it there moments before. He reached out, his movements unhurried, and lifted the drawing with both hands, holding it as though it were more delicate than glass. The students exchanged glances, their whispers swelling beneath the surface, waiting for the moment of mockery they had already rehearsed in their minds. But Adrian did not laugh. His sharp, business-hardened eyes softened, his expression shifting from neutral curiosity to genuine wonder. He tilted the paper slightly, studying the crooked cottage, the uneven trees, the shafts of light breaking through the drawn clouds, and for the first time since he had entered the room, a smile curved across his face. The silence in the classroom deepened, heavy and unexpected, for the children had anticipated scorn, not admiration. A boy nudged his friend, raising his eyebrows as if to say, "Why isn't he laughing?" Another girl leaned forward in disbelief, whispering so low it was nearly a breath. Adrian traced the lines with his eyes, lingering on the tiny details that others had missed. The flowers tucked shyly at the corner of the path, the way the smoke from the chimney curled upward as if reaching for freedom. He did not see mistakes, he saw honesty. He did not see crookedness, he saw courage in every imperfect stroke. His smile grew warmer, almost nostalgic, as though the picture reminded him of something long buried, a memory of his own beginnings when his dreams had been fragile sketches instead of towering buildings. The children fidgeted uneasily, their earlier confidence dissolving under the weight of his silence. They had wanted him to confirm their cruelty, to validate their laughter, but the longer he studied the paper, the more they began to realize this moment was not unfolding the way they had imagined. Sofia sat frozen at her desk, her hands clenched in her lap, her breath caught in her throat. She did not dare lift her head, but she felt the weight of the room shift, the strange quiet pressing in on her from all sides. She knew what drawing he held. She knew the lines as intimately as she knew her own heartbeat. Her stomach twisted with dread, expecting the ridicule to come at any second, harsher now because it would fall from the lips of someone important. But instead, his silence stretched into something else, something heavier and gentler all at once. The room no longer vibrated with laughter, it pulsed with uncertainty. The man who had built empires, who had stood on grand stages, now stood utterly still in a small classroom, holding the fragile dream of a child, between his hands as if it mattered. His eyes softened further, the kind of softness that comes when the heart remembers what it means to be young, to be afraid, and to be brave enough to try anyway. A hush blanketed the students, their smirks fading into confusion, then into discomfort, for the reflection they saw in his face was not mockery, but reverence. The air seemed to thicken with the unspoken truth that something important was about to be revealed, and though none of them understood it fully, they knew enough to keep quiet. Adrian Cole looked at the drawing one last time, his thumb brushing carefully along the paper's edge, and the small smile never left his face. The weight of the silence stretched until Adrian Cole finally lifted his gaze from the paper, his eyes sweeping slowly across the room, steady and deliberate, as if he could see through every smirk and whisper that had filled it moments earlier. His voice, deep and commanding, broke through the stillness with sudden clarity as he asked, "Who drew this masterpiece?" The question landed like a stone dropped into water, sending ripples of shock across the classroom. A chorus of muffled chuckles rose instantly, nervous and mocking, and every finger turned toward Sofia at once. She felt the burn of 100 eyes pressing down on her, and her body stiffened, the familiar weight of shame climbing back into her chest. But before the laughter could gather strength, Adrian raised his hand sharply, his palm steady in the air, and the sound died in an instant. The authority in his gesture left no room for disobedience, and even the boldest troublemakers fell silent. His gaze returned to the drawing in his hand, and his voice softened, but carried with unmistakable conviction as he declared, "This is not just a drawing. This is imagination. This is courage. This is beauty." His words lingered in the air, heavy and undeniable, settling into every corner of the room like a truth no one could escape. The students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, glancing at one another with wide eyes, their earlier smugness dissolving into confusion. They had expected him to confirm their ridicule, to join in their laughter, but instead he had elevated what they mocked into something precious. Sofia sat frozen, her lips parted slightly, her breath caught in her throat. The word beauty echoed in her ears, almost too much to believe. No one had ever said that about her work before. No one had called her drawings brave or imaginative. Her chest tightened, and a rush of warmth spread through her body as tears pressed urgently at the corners of her eyes. For the first time, someone important had looked at her art and truly seen her, not as the girl to laugh at, but as an artist, a creator, someone worth noticing. She clutched the edge of her desk, her knuckles pale, fighting the urge to crumble into tears in front of them all. Adrian's expression did not waver. He spoke as though every word was carved in stone, as though denying them was impossible. The children who had mocked her now sat in awkward silence, some frowning, some lowering their gazes, suddenly aware that their laughter had been exposed for what it was, small and cruel. A boy who had shouted the loudest earlier shifted in his chair, his face flushing red, while a girl who had pointed at Sofia's drawing bit her lip nervously, wishing to erase her own words. The authority of a millionaire CEO had turned their cruelty into shame, and they could not escape it. But for Sofia, the moment felt like light breaking through a storm. The cage of ridicule she had been trapped in cracked open, and a fragile hope flickered in her chest. Her eyes widened as if to take in every second, every syllable that fell from his lips, afraid she might never hear words like them again. The classroom no longer felt like a prison. It felt suspent, dead in time, every detail sharper, brighter, as though her entire world was shifting in those few seconds. She lowered her gaze, blinking rapidly, her lashes wet. But no matter how hard she tried, the tears gathered anyway. They were not tears of humiliation now, but of something she had never experienced before: validation. It was as if someone had reached into the very place she hid her heart and told her it mattered, told her it was enough. For a girl who had been invisible, those words were a lifeline, and she clung to them desperately, afraid they might slip away if she let go. The stillness in the room felt almost unbearable, like a mirror forcing the students to confront their own reflections, and Adrian Cole let the silence linger deliberately, giving every child time to feel the weight of what had just happened. before his deep voice rose once more. Success, he began firmly, his eyes scanning across every desk, is not about mocking others. It's not about pointing fingers or tearing down someone who dares to create. His words carried a gravity that settled over the classroom like a heavy cloak, and no one dared to shift or speak. Success, he continued, his tone softer now but no less powerful, is about lifting people up. It's about seeing potential where others see weakness. It's about courage. Courage to dream, to imagine, to be different. The children lowered their gazes, shame creeping up their faces, as if the truth itself was holding a mirror to their cruelty. Some fiddled with their pencils nervously, others pressed their palms flat against their desks as though anchoring themselves against the flood of guilt rising within them. Adrian held up Sofia's drawing, his hand steady, the paper fluttering slightly in the air, as though even it carried a voice of its own. "One day," he said, pausing for effect, his eyes falling briefly on Sofia, who sat trembling. "Gee," with disbelief, "this girl's art may inspire the world while you're too busy laughing." The words struck like thunder, sharp and undeniable, and a collective hush blanketed the room. Every smirk, every giggle that had once filled the air seemed childish and hollow now, exposed under the weight of his truth. The students glanced sideways at one another, their earlier confidence unraveling into discomfort. A few of them swallowed hard, regret tugging at their expressions, and the boy who had mocked Sofia's crooked lines pressed his lips tightly together, wishing he could take back the sting of his words. The girl beside him shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting toward Sofia, guilt flickering in her face. Then, in that fragile silence, something unexpected stirred. A single pair of hands clapped softly, hesitant but sincere, the sound breaking through the tension like a pebble tossed into still water. Heads turned, eyes widened, and for a heartbeat, no one knew how to react. But then another pair of hands joined, stronger this time, the sound echoing louder in the charged air. The clapping grew, hesitant at first, then more assured, until the rhythm of it filled the room. One by one, as though some invisible wall had cracked, the students who had mocked her found themselves applauding too, the sound rolling like a wave across the classroom. The applause swelled, no longer a scattered trickle, but a united chorus, the sound of regret transforming into something almost redemptive. Sofia's breath caught in her chest as she looked around in disbelief. The very children who had laughed at her only moments ago, now clapping for her with faces flushed and eyes softened by shame. Her fingers trembled against the edge of her desk, her heart hammering wildly, and for a moment she wasn't sure if this was real or a dream she had dared to imagine. Adrian's eyes softened as he watched the transformation unfold, his lips curving into a faint, knowing smile. He hadn't scolded them with cruelty, he had taught them with truth, and the truth had pierced deeper than an punishment ever could. The sound of the applause filled the room completely now, erasing the echoes of mockery that had once stung like arrows. Sofia blinked rapidly, tears threatening again, but this time they were not born of humiliation. They were tears of wonder, of fragile hope, of a dignity finally restored. She sat straighter in her seat, her chest lifting as though she were finally able to breathe freely for the first time in a long while. The applause wrapped around her like a blanket, warm and undeniable. And though her classmates' faces showed guilt, their clapping carried something else too: respect. In that moment, the lesson was not just for them, but for her as well. A reminder that even the smallest voice can rise above cruelty when someone dares to speak truth into it. From that day forward, Sofia's world began to shift in ways she had never dared to imagine. For the label that had once clung to her like a shadow, the girl they laughed at, slowly dissolved, replaced by a new image, one painted by admiration and curiosity. The very classmates who had ridiculed her only days before now leaned across their desks with softer voices, asking if she might show them the sketches she kept hidden in her worn-out notebook. Some of them, their eyes downcast with regret, whispered apologies under their breath, not grand gestures, but timid acknowledgements of the hurt they had caused. At first, Sofia didn't know how to respond. the scars of mockery still tender. But as time passed, she realized their change of heart was genuine, born not from pity, but from respect that had been planted in that unforgettable moment. Each time a classmate asked to see her art, she hesitated, her fingers trembling just as they had before, but now those hands no longer trembled with fear, they trembled with the weight of being seen, truly seen. Her drawings, once crumpled under desks or hidden at the bottom of her bag, began to appear proudly on her desk, her pencil dancing freely as if it had found a new rhythm. Teachers began to notice too, pausing by her side longer than usual, nodding with approval as their eyes swept over the details of her work. The art teacher, who had once considered her simply another quiet student, now spoke of competitions and galleries, suggesting her imagination could take her far beyond the walls of their small classroom. Sofia felt something stir inside her, something that had been buried under years of ridicule, confidence. It was fragile at first, like a seed just beginning to break through the soil, but every encouraging glance, every genuine word of interest, watered it until it grew stronger, rooted in a belief she never thought she would carry. She walked the hallways with her head higher than before, her steps lighter, her eyes no longer glued to the floor in fear of being mocked. Her sketchbook, once guarded like a secret, became her companion in plain sight, carried openly under her arm as though she dared anyone to challenge her again. And yet, no one did. Instead, they began to respect her in a way that felt almost surreal. The same boy who had once jeered at her crooked lines now lingered beside her, offering hesitant smiles as if trying to bridge the distance his cruelty had carved. Another girl, who had joined the laughter before, shyly asked if Sofia could teach her how to shade properly, her voice laced with both embarrassment and admiration. These were small moments, but to Sofia they were monumental, each one a brick in the foundation of the new identity she was building. And though her classmates had changed, it was her own heart that had transformed most of all. For the first time, she no longer doubted the worth of her imagination, no longer silenced the whispers inside that told her she was meant to create. Adrian Cole's words replayed in her mind often, not as an echo of one fleeting moment, but as a guiding truth, that courage lay not in perfection, but in daring to express herself, even when the world mocked. Those words had taken her pain, raw and heavy, and reshaped it into something powerful, a determination that no laughter could ever undo again. Sofia's mother noticed the change too, watching her daughter return home each day with eyes brighter and steps quicker, her sketchbook now brimming with pages she wanted to share rather than hide. Even on quiet nights, when the world outside was still, Sofia would sit by the window, pencil in hand, the glow of the lamp spilling across her paper, and she would smile to herself. For she knew that she was no longer defined by the laughter of others, but by the passion burning within her. And though she was just a girl in a classroom, she carried the certainty that her art could one day reach beyond those walls, touching people in places she had never been. The new beginning was not loud or grand. It was quiet, steady, like a dawn breaking after a long night. And with every line she drew, every stroke she dared to make, Sofia stepped further into that new dawn, her head held high, her heart brimming with a power she would never again surrender.